So we're both recording.
Yes, we are. Patty, you want to start?
Sure. We have Sondra Barrett, PhD, with us today, and myself, Patty Rosser, and Ronnie Aiden. So we're going to learn all about Sondra Barrett today, who she is as a person, and we're going to be talking about her book, Secret of Your Cells. So, Ronnie, you want to start, or you want me to start with Sondra by asking her questions about herself?
I'll start and give a little background really quickly. Patty, I want to say a little bit more about Patty. Patty and I have been together for probably over 30 years now with the nonprofit that we have, Evolving Health Education. And why that's significant is because that's one of the link-ups we had with Sondra and teaching classes together, which has been going on for about 3 years. So that's one of the reasons we're here today, to tell you about our upcoming classes and ongoing classes. And Patty, when I had the magazine for 13 years, she had my clients that she would put on a cable television network called Adventures in Health, and she would interview them. So this is her passion, and my passion is bringing people together like Sondra and other valuable teachers. And after working for 3 years with Sondra, I am so honored to be part of this today and share her with the world. So what we're going to talk about is a little bit about her personal background, and then we're going to move right into what she's educating in and how you can get involved. And so we're going to do a real casual interview here and have a lot of fun. So
learn about yourselves.
Yeah, and talk about yourselves, which is perfect timing. This is information we all can use, and it doesn't cost a penny to communicate with ourselves. And I think Sondra's going to give us a lot of information about how to do that. So Sondra, welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here with both of you and see where we dance today. To take our energies out into the world when it's our laughter is so much needed.
Exactly. So you want to start off with, where did you grow up, Sondra? I guess, where did Sondra Barrett start? What was her beginnings?
I was born in Philadelphia. And my parents kept on moving back and forth between Philadelphia and Chicago. So it's like that question, where did I grow up? I'm still growing up. I grew up in both places. Born in Philadelphia, my first couple of years in Philadelphia, then in Chicago, then back to Philadelphia, then back to Chicago. My father kept on going into business. He was managing a jazz nightclub on the south side of Chicago. So he kept on going back to do that. And I was an only child at that time, so there was no thought, oh, we're going to pull her out of school in the middle of the year. So I feel rootless in some ways, or double rooted also. Philadelphia and Chicago.
So growing up, since you had this exposure of jazz, did you want to be a performer?
I did.
At one point?
I did. I wanted to be, well, way in the beginning, I wanted to be a singer. And at my dad's jazz club, at 6 years, I mean, if they couldn't find a babysitter for me, they would bring me. So when I was about 6 years old, I sang in the club. And, I think, you think about choices that we make. Mm-hmm. It's like the choices of the songs. One was Don't Fence Me In, which says a lot about me. And the other was Quanta Lagusta. I've got to get going. Where am I going? I don't know. But I did sing when I was 6. And in junior high school, Hubie White was a big African-American basketball player. Mm-hmm. He and I sang a song for the whole junior high school. Again, I've just been thinking about what was I singing. It was The Naughty Lady of Shady Lane. And then in high school, so there's this theme when I look at what I've done as growing up. The theme in high school, then at the senior class play or something, it was like, I want to be evil. So if I look at the songs I sang, it says a lot about probably who I thought I was.
But who you're not now, of course.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, it grew into wanting to be in musical comedy, and I wanted to go to Pasadena Playhouse in the worst way. That was my vision for where I would go when I graduated from high school. But I didn't think I was pretty enough. I didn't think I was talented enough, so I never went that direction. I just, I went, and my aptitude test for college said, you're really good in languages and English, so I started as a journalism major in college, giving up the idea of being an entertainer.
Wow. So how did you come from a journalist? Is that when now you can kind of take all that knowledge that you wrote your books with too, your present books, books that you wrote.
So how did I take journalism to science?
Yes, absolutely.
So I knew I was smart. I always was smart as a kid. And when I entered college, when you have a choice of what you're going to take in liberal arts, what are you going to take for physical sciences? And there were these survey courses, and I thought, oh, I'm too smart for that. I'm not going to take a survey course. I'm going to take basic chemistry course because I loved chemistry in high school, had a great teacher. And the first semester in chemistry, I was close to flunking out. And not a great choice. So I remember going to the dean or the counselor at school and saying, I better go take the survey course. And they were going to give me permission to do that. And I was always choosing what was hard for me. I said, no, that's not as much a challenge. I'm going to see if I can take the next course in chemistry and do okay. And I was actually doing okay. And I look at the choice then to go to science. I was also the only girl in the class. And I pretty much liked that.
Yeah, that was pretty fun. Yeah.
Yeah, so being the only girl in the chemistry.
As being the naughty girl in high school.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Although it's very straight. But yeah, it was that I wanted to be like all the pre-meds. I morphed into being a pre-med just because I didn't want to be like all the other girls. All the other girls were becoming teachers, and this is in the 50s, wow. 60s. It's like, no, I'm going to do something hard. No, science.
It is hard. But
it was hard.
So much in such a short period of time. My gosh.
Yeah. How I got through it, I think, is, looking at how I learn. I don't learn by listening or reading necessarily. I had to draw chemistry. So I had to make it a physical, kinesthetic experience for me to really understand it. If my body didn't get it, I didn't get it. I think that's still pretty much for me.
So that your creativity started at that point too.
Oh, definitely, definitely. I mean, as a kid, I was always drawing. That was part of my survival, drawing and reading books, because I was alone a lot. So this self-isolation, I know it, I know it in my cells. Right. So I was alone a lot. So I had to be able to take care of myself, reading and drawing. That's how I did it. Yeah.
That's fascinating. How you got that close to that. So then you got more into, microbiology, of course, and then under the microscope, which is with working with children and children's cancers. But I think that was a transition to that point, wasn't it?
Well, it was a big transition because I decided I majored in chemistry in college.
Right.
A double major in chemistry and English. And then since I had wanted to be a pre-med, they were accepting one girl at a time, a semester. I applied in my junior year, didn't get accepted to medical school. Although guys with my grade point were getting in. Mm-hmm. So one of the big turning points was the interview for medical school was with the head of the Department of Biochemistry at the University of Illinois. And I had no idea that the medical school had a graduate school. So I ended up spending my interview not talking about medical school, but talking about the biochemistry program, asking questions about it, because I loved biochemistry. And so it ended that I applied to graduate school at the medical school in biochemistry. And that's where I really moved into being a scientist. To me, no, I didn't think I was a scientist. That's where I started studying science as a professional.
Right.
But never used a microscope. I mean, studied biochemistry as an undergraduate. As a graduate student, I chose something that was close to chemistry as I could, because there was a wide range of projects. And it's so timely now when I think of what I chose to look at the influenza virus and try to understand how it infected cells. But there was a protein I know this might get too technical. There's a protein in the influenza virus, an enzyme, that until that time, no enzymes were ever, that kind of an activated protein, no enzymes were ever found in viruses. And because the virus was grown in embryonated chicken eggs, chicks and eggs before they're hatched.
Exactly. Yeah.
They thought maybe this funny protein came from the chicken. Did it come from the chicken or the egg? So my first work was to figure out, was this enzyme part of the chicken or part of the virus? And the goal was ultimately to be able to see if this enzyme was important in infectivity, that it helped the virus get into the cell. I think we still don't know that answer. That was
in the environment around the chicken. I don't know. That's, I didn't.
It actually turned out to be the virus's protein. I learned, about immunology before I studied immunology, because I had to develop antibodies to the protein to see which was it chicken protein or virus protein. It sounds kind of ludicrous thinking of it now. I mean, I used to have nightmares because I would have to grow the virus.
Wow.
In 36 dozen chicken eggs, and with these little chicks that don't have feathers yet. So I would have nightmares after I harvested all these chicken eggs of the mother chickens were going to come after me. I've killed all their babies. I've killed all their babies. Yeah. But, it got to be a really long time. And it's like by the time I was able to prove that it wasn't a chicken protein, it was a viral protein, I said, I need to get out. I need to finish my PhD. There was not time to look at the infectivity story. So I got my PhD doing some basic studies on influenza virus. And then, I was married at the time, and my husband he finished dental school and he was going to California. I knew I wanted to live in California anyway. I remember wearing a tag at some science meeting. I'm looking for a job. I'm looking for a job in San Francisco. And somebody came up to me. She was on the faculty at UC Berkeley, and says, "Oh, I know somebody who's got lots of money in San Francisco. He's the head of immunology. Tell him her name was Bunny Koshland. Tell him you're a friend of mine." So his name was Hugh Freudenberg, a very famous immunologist, very ornery immunologist. And so I called up Dr. Freudenberg and said, Bunny Koshland sent me. So he assumed I was a good friend of hers. I had just met her because I was wearing a sign. And so we set up an interview, and he said, "Okay, which project do you want to work on?" This was as a postdoctoral fellow. I mean, I thought I was so smart. that I could get a real job, not some kind of postdoctoral training. But you have to do training after you get your PhD. So I was surprised at how easy it was to, quote, get a training fellowship with him. And I once more picked out a project that was as close to biochemistry, because I knew nothing about cells. I knew nothing about immunology. So what can I choose that's as close to chemistry that I know? And again, it turned out to be, turned out to be a genetic disease in little boys who died of infection. And the question was to find out what was wrong with their white blood cells, that they were dying of infection. And so I had this, I would have to go down to pediatrics when a child was getting diagnosed or treated and get their cells and figure out now what's wrong with these cells. And it was the first time I looked under the microscope. Maybe I did as an undergraduate, but never had an experience of what cells are like. And I feel it was a blessing of that I took on that first kind of project, because these were white blood cells, the neutrophils, the phagocytes. Those are the cells that you can see doing their job under the microscope. If I chose another project, it could have just been a cell that just sat in the dish and it didn't do anything. You couldn't see what it was doing. So it's like, okay, I can watch these cells go after microorganisms, or we use latex beads in the laboratory. And that was where one of the shifting points for me was like, how smart these invisible creatures are, that they know that there's something strange in its environment and can go after it and get rid of it. If it was a bacteria, they could get rid of it. And so I fell in love with cells, pretty early on in my training as a postdoc. And I did find out what was wrong with these cells. And I challenged the big honchos in science because they didn't think that was what was wrong with the cells. So I had a good experience early on that I was able to ask a question, because I really didn't know what a scientist did. I was just doing it to be different. That I could ask a question and figure out how to answer the question in the laboratory. And it was like, that was really exciting for me, that I could do that. I could do that. And that morphed into, I was separated at a time, morphed into meeting all these physicians and getting involved and wanting to do much more clinical research. And the first guy I got involved with, we wrote a grant together, and we were looking at what was Hodgkin's disease cells all about. And this is a story I probably haven't told to too many people. It shows you the place of where women were in science. So when was this? Like 1971 or 72? Mm-hmm. No, mid 74, 75. So he was a pathologist and an MD, and we took on this very clinical question. What's the Hodgkin's disease cell? How do we get rid of it? Which is kind of a lymphoma. And so we wrote the grant together. We got a site visit from NIH. But before we had the site visit, the head of hematology and the head of the Cancer Research Institute coached him on how to answer the questions that we would have at the site visit. And who do they ask all the questions to? Not him, but me, without any coaching. Because what I had developed, I didn't develop the story about Hodgkin's disease. I developed, well, how would we test what kind of cell it is? How would we know if it's a white blood cell or a monocyte or this or that? And so it made me see, in a way I was kind of angry. It's like they trained him. They didn't train me at all because they didn't think the site visitors were going to ask me anything, that they would just ask the MD pathologist. So we got the grant. We had, a couple of years in our lab at the Cancer Institute at UCSF. Our working relationship kind of, and And I decided I wanted to see if I could do it on my own, not be attached to an MD, because I realized I was a scientist. I knew how to ask and answer questions. So I wrote a grant basically on looking at diagnosing leukemia, basically leukemias, in acute leukemias. And the same physicians who trained, my colleague, decided they wanted to help me with a grant. And they went through reviewing the whole grant, and they helped me develop the ideas. And they also said, the head of hematology said, you're likely not going to get this because, one, you're a woman. Two, you're a PhD doing clinical research. Lo and behold, NIH gave me full funding, and I had applied to National Cancer Institute and American Cancer Society. And so when you apply with the same question, you can only get money from one place. So NIH said, here's all your money.
Wow.
Which was great. And then American Cancer Society called me and said, we want to give you money. And I said, you can't do it. I just accepted funding from the government. Well, is there anything else you want to work on? Yeah, there are other ideas I had. So I got double funding, I think, because I was the woman at that point. They needed to fund token women. So here I am, basically almost fresh out of school and running a laboratory, training physicians, hematologists, how to do research, and really got into much more the clinical story. One of the, I know I can ramble on all about all this. One of the turning points for me in shifting beliefs, because really this whole time my belief was, as a scientist, if you can't measure it, it's not real. And it's numbers matter. And, because I was now training hematologists, oncologists in my lab to do research, they would come in and tell stories about their patients. Because we were studying them, studying them in the lab. And the story that changed me was one of the physicians, Charlie, came in. He said, Mrs. So-and-so, she was 82 years old, stopped responding to chemotherapy. She had acute leukemia. And so he was predicting she'd be dead in, a couple of months. And, but he followed her. Obviously, she was his patient. And she stayed alive for a couple of years. And that didn't make sense to me at all. It's like, how is this happening? How is she staying alive without chemotherapy? And it turned out because Charlie was following her, what was happening in her life. She had all these events in her life, grandchildren's graduation, wedding anniversaries, all kinds of things for a couple of years. And none of that made sense to me as a scientist, but it was, whoa, there's more here than biology. There's more here than chemistry. There's more here than diagnostic risk factors. So it really moved me, moved the way I saw things.
And what age were you then? Did you have children at that time or no?
I had two little babies, early 30s, close to mid 30s.
And at that point, you've accomplished so much just in your mid 30s. Look what you've accomplished already as a woman, as a PhD in your field. I mean, that's amazing. And being a mother too, the energies that requires that. So accolades to you. My gosh, that's awesome.
Thank you.
But yeah, I guess, do you think your children helped you see other sides other than science?
Well, that's a whole other story, which I won't go into. Okay. What helped me see my children better was working with kids with cancer. So that working with children who were dying or potentially dying really shifted how I saw life in a big way, much more than that. Brought me much closer to my own children because I was basically a diehard scientist. I knew the only way I could survive was 24/7. I mean, I needed to keep on raising money, and I needed to have results, and being a mother wasn't primary for me then.
Right.
So it was, people always say, well, how could you work with all these kids with cancer? I said, well, they brought me back to my kids. They showed me what was really important.
It would. I could see that totally.
Yeah.
As a health care professional myself for many 45 plus years. Yeah. I was away from my daughter and my family a lot too.
Yeah.
But my patients helped me be a better mother too, I think. Yeah.
So Sondra, at that time, was that time when you had a neighbor child and friend that got you moving in this direction a little bit deeper?
Well, it wasn't a neighbor child. It was a child what I started doing, because my diagnostic tests were first through the microscope. So, and I was the only game in town that was doing a lot of this work, and acute myelogenous leukemias. Mm-hmm. And so a dad, because I would be down when they were getting a bone marrow biopsy or blood, the parents got to know me because I'm the only non-medical person in the room during diagnosis or treatment. Dad came to my lab and said, would I photograph his son's cells? Because he wanted to use guided imagery, to see if his son could visualize getting rid of his leukemia cells. And I thought that was an interesting idea. So started photographing cells through the microscope, and like you see behind me, those are wines, but lots of vitamins and minerals, and wanted to do slideshows for kids down in pediatric oncology. And because I was part of that team in many ways, doing research on children and adult leukemias, they let me come down, and they gave me a treatment room, the physicians. And the little boy that you asked about, Ronnie, was the first child who, when I got off the elevator with my slide projector, he was at the elevator, says, what are you doing? And I said, I'm going to do slideshows. I said, can you help me find a room? Can you gather the kids up? So he was 5. And I fell in love with him instantly. And the book is dedicated to him. He gathered up the kids, and we went to the treatment room, and I did slideshows every Tuesday afternoon then in pediatric oncology, showing kids healthy cells, unhealthy cells, vitamins, minerals. I wanted to, occupy their time while they're waiting for their chemotherapy. I don't even know if I named anything, because there were kids from 3 and 4 to 18 that were watching the slides. I wish I had recorded, what was I saying to them? But, it was basically keeping their attention before their chemo. And so he and his sister became really part of my family with my kids. So we would spend a lot of time together with, I would bring them home to my house. I would take him to the park. I did the kind of gestalty things I was learning for my own healing with him. I mean, poor little Alvaro was, he got all this stuff. But he was from Nicaragua, his family. And his grandma, I'd never met his parents, until the day he died. His grandmother would bring him to the clinic, and she must have trusted me, because I'm taking her grandson out, and we don't speak English. And I guess the big turning point for me was when it looked like Alvaro was going to die. I had no idea how to deal with it. It's like, he's my 3rd child. I mean, I loved him like one of my own. And I didn't really know how to deal with it. And there was a clinical psychologist who came to UCSF, pediatric oncology, Tom Pinkson, and he would work with, there were three of us who were doing weird things. One was a puppet therapist, one was an art therapist, and me, the slideshow therapist. You know, we were doing creative things with kids. And he, on occasion, would come and give us support because we really couldn't, the medical staff didn't have time to talk to us about what was going on emotionally. And so he came on a number of occasions. And so I remember calling him up and saying, Tom, I really don't know how to deal with, you know, Alvaro's impending death. And I write about it in the book. It's like, you don't deal, you feel. It's like, well, that I didn't want to. That's not where I wanted to go. And I knew I needed to, if I'm working with children who are potentially life-threatened, dying, I needed to look at that much more deeply. So I made an appointment to have a session with him, and went to his office in Mill Valley, and he's got Huichol paintings. He's sitting on the floor on a rug. He's got a shell. He's with sage in it, and he's smudging me. He's wearing some weird shirt. It's like, this was not the clinical psychologist I thought I was going to.
He exposed you something totally new at that point. No.
Totally new. He was, I don't think he had completed his shamanic training then, his apprenticeship, which was 11 years.
Wow.
But I ended up training with him, doing shamanic training with him, because I knew that was another way of knowing that I was not comfortable with. I'm still developing that, to be comfortable in not knowing, or be comfortable in, there's no data here.
Right.
So Sondra, I believe that this little boy was part of a video that you have available. Is that true? Is he the one that we've got a video on that it gives more information, in-depth information?
There's a picture of him, which I didn't ask his family for permission to use, but there is a picture of him because he was the turning point, real turning point of not only what can I do, but what can be known, what can change. And he was also the first person I was ever with who died. So his family, I mean, that, like I said, I never met his mother until the day he died. So his family, when it looked like, we had a couple of months after that first fear that he pulled through with steroids or something. And when the medical staff knew this was the day he was going to die, I mean, I'm still honored that they've asked me. The grandmother, the mother came to me, the social worker came to me and said, would you pick up his sister from school? Because we know he's going to die today. And so going to the school to pick up Lisa, maybe she was 7. She was asking me, is it going to hurt him? I was like, I don't know. Where's he going to go? I don't know. And she was Catholic, so I don't know what the beliefs were. And so I'm trying to answer her questions. And then when I get her to the hospital, the family invited me in to be with them when he leaves his body. And I was totally shocked, totally moved that they would trust me in that, or include me in that really sacred moment. And I also write about that in the book because I'd never been with anyone who died. And it was just looking at the light left. Mm-hmm. He was like an angel to start with, but the light left. Like, whoa. So it was real turning points to take me much more into my soul, places that I wouldn't have identified at all if you think of who on your path triggers these kind of changes. Like, well, Alvaro was a big one. Big one. Yeah.
So is that video available on your website, I believe?
Yeah, I think it may be that introduction to the secrets of your cells. I'll have to look at. It could be in the introduction to the course that I have, because I don't always have him in the story, but I think that's it. That first introduction to the course includes him.
Right. I bring that up because there's a lot of information in there that I remember that is a good starting place to go a little bit deeper. So now we have you identifying and looking at cells that we've never seen that we can actually visualize now. And we've got the shaman side of you coming in. So tell us a little bit more about that.
That's kind of a funny place. It's a strange place because, I would never call myself a shaman. I'm not a shaman. I just did some training and did some work, and I'm curious. And I think one of the big reasons I was working with Tom, I saw that I was, especially as I started working with adults, that people would come to me and want me to give them a guided visualization on getting rid of their cancer. And it wasn't some script that somebody else had written. I could just find myself getting really quiet and going into a meditative state and let whatever words came out be what guided them. And I didn't know where information was coming from. I mean, I had a gift. I knew it. Now I know it as a gift. Then I was not so sure, because am I making this up? Is God talking to me? Am I reading their minds? And so for a number of years early on, I was using that kind of the shamanic way of knowing, that imagination and listening. But because I didn't know, I'm still the scientist, trust where it was coming, I stopped doing that until fairly recently. I mean, it's like 30 years I stopped doing that because I'm making this stuff up.
Well, I bring this up because I find it personally amazing. And then with working with you, seeing other students that have been involved in your work, when we start with the book, and we'll come back and talk a little bit more about the book because of where the available classes and all the information in it, and where we are right now. It's very timely. Everyone can benefit by knowing this knowledge. But in addition to that, I think the shamanic side partly was keeping you under the microscope, and just like behind you we can see what a beautiful drop of wine does. You also went into the body with the cell salts we have and the astro elementals, if you will, the other things were built and made out of, and you've given us from under the microscope some more beautiful visuals that we can get in touch with our innards, and our inner self is probably the number one place we all grow from. We always want to make it outside ourselves, but I think you've given us a very complete view of how we can go inside visually, and then you've added your scientific information that can bring validity to all of it. So will you speak a little bit about that to us?
Well, one of the reasons I was doing the photography and showing it to kids, I wanted them to see the beauty that was inside. And then when Lisa, Alvaro's sister, asked me where he's going, I began thinking, oh, this is where we go. This is the stuff that's left after the spirit leaves. And so I was capturing these pretty pictures. And it was only, I think, when I did the mineral salts, did I basically freak out at what, I mean, that there could be more to us than biology and chemistry. Because my co-author of Immune book, he and his then partner Elson Haas had asked me, how many years ago, in the late 70s, to photograph minerals related to astrology. I'm still at UCSF, and it's like, you've got to give me a break. Minerals and astrology, And I said, if you can get me the pure minerals, because the story in astrology was related to cell salts, which were homeopathic remedies, which I knew enough about that's mostly lactose. It's not a pure mineral that you would see. So I said, if you can get me the pure minerals, I'll photograph the 12 minerals, because I can show this to kids. It's part of their body. And so when I photographed the 12 minerals, I was shocked. Well, I was shocked because, first of all, I see 4 shapes. And because I'm a microscopist who categorized things, like, is there a category of 4 in astrology? Like, yeah, the elements. Oh, okay, the 4 elements. And what I saw was all the minerals related to air signs were all square. All the minerals related to water signs were curvy. All the minerals related to earth signs were round. And all the minerals related to fire signs were hexagons. And I thought, this can't be. Using a microscope, picking up occult knowledge, ancient knowledge. And I remember going to have a session with Tom. I was working with Tom then in the late 70s. And he said, this is really important information. You need to get it out. And I promised I would get it out. The next day I had pneumonia. So it made me begin to see the possibility that our emotions, our fears, and everything else can help create the environment for getting ill. So getting pneumonia, I didn't have to share anything. And didn't share anything, as you know, for decades, because this is really weird stuff. It's really weird stuff. And what I see with the microscopic photography, people can resonate with the information. I've used it often to help understand relationships. Who are you elementally? Are you a water person? Are you a fire person? It's like you and I are more like elementally. You have some fire, I have no fire. So what does that mean? So using that kind of information, looking at, well, how do we remedy that? And so that makes, as I get more and more into that and trust that information, it made me, I still question, act more on my intuition or the shaman or what, that other part of knowing, that other way of knowing that's not measurable. And when I do it, it's really fun. It's also challenging because it's not my place of comfort. But, at my age, it felt like it's time to be able to share all this and not be afraid of what people are going to think, or are they going to criticize me? I remember at UC, the last grant I got was, can we make leukemia cells normal? Can we make it normal with vitamins, minerals, hormones, non-toxic chemicals? And I remember being criticized by colleagues at, why are you doing this holistic research? Like, well, I didn't want to see kids on chemotherapy anymore. I wanted to see, was there another way of we didn't know much about the genes then involved in cancer or leukemia. And so it's like, yeah, I got a lot of money to look at, we're able to make some leukemia cells normal. And my decision way back when was, this was in 83, I needed to leave science, because if I was going to follow that, I was going to have to start working with radioactivity. I could no longer do it with a microscope and other kinds of measurable techniques. And I just didn't want to work on with radioactivity, but it was, it was questionable kind of research. But at that time, the only funding I ever had trouble getting was the kind of psychosocial stuff. How do we help kids go back to school who have, some kind of cancer? But the basic science, I could always get funding.
So, Sondra, I'm certainly not a scientist, so I don't think like one for sure. But what I can personally absolutely attest to, the number of years that I've known you, the classes I've taken with you, you have helped me personally and many others that I've attended these classes with learn to get inside my body, learn a different kind of an understanding. Whether it's totally scientifically based or not, I don't know, but seeing myself under a microscope and understanding the workings of the cell and our immune system has broadened and expanded my view of myself, how I talk to other people and share, and particularly right now when we're facing these things we're currently facing. Can you help us a little bit with how you've seen the workings of a cell and how our emotions really do affect a cell and how we personally have some control over that?
Great question. Well, it's like to recognize cells are us. Trillions of cells make us up. And it's what we think, and one of my mantras is cells are always in the now. They're in the present moment. And what takes them out of the present moment is what we're thinking and what we're feeling, because those become chemical messages that tell the cell what to do. So if we're like right now, how many people are freaked out, afraid of what's going on, or afraid of the unknown? If we're in a state of fear, worry, that triggers the stress response. The stress response says, you need to use your energy and all your resources for immediate survival, which is breathing, fighting, or running away from the fear. And any of your energy and resources for long-term survival, like reproduction, digestion, immune function, that's all turned off. We need to take care of the moment, which is fight or run away. And the body, the brain, our cells don't know the difference between what's real and what's imagined. Just think of that. Our worry is as real to ourselves as fighting a lion. And all the resources we need to fight the lion or our worry get wasted if we stay in that mode. And so for me, what's most important right now is, how do we turn off the worry? How do we turn off that stress response? Because that's what's going to protect us. Because, we'll hear lots of stories on stress depressing immune responses, but it doesn't only do that. Stress can hyperactivate inflammation, so it changes the microbes in our gut, which is going to educate the immune system to, oh, you've got a threat here. And all the inflammation, if you have rheumatoid arthritis, if you have lung disease, if you have diabetes, inflammation gets turned on, which is not healthy in the long run. In an acute stage, it is. So it's like, well, what can I do that takes my cells out of worry? What can I always look at, I want simple tricks, because one thing isn't going to be useful for everybody. So, I've been writing a lot about immune health the past week. One of my offshoots in this trajectory of what I'm going to be when I grow up is, once I started working with individuals, just kind of an offshoot, doing imagery and doing groups with people with cancer. Again, I'm not trained as that kind of caregiver, but I started teaching a field called PsychoNeuroImmunology, which in the 90s was very new. And that's the role of the psyche, the mind, how it influences the nervous system, how it influences the immune system. And so as I was one of these probably few people then in the country teaching health professionals at a graduate level, PsychoNeuroImmunology, I really, I thought it was going to be easy. I really got much more engaged with, how does the mind and the emotions play a part in the body? What goes on? And And the first class I taught was at JFK University in the holistic health program. And the students didn't just want to hear stories, they want to know what works. And I was like, I don't know what works. I know I can read all these studies on stress management, but I don't know what works. So that was, I don't know if Elson even remembers, that was the late 90s when I approached Elson Haas to say, can I work in your clinic? Can I work with patients to see what works? And over the years, you know, I've become much more researcher in terms of what are the strategies that help us really manage our stress. And the one I've been talking about this week is laughter. I mean, we have so many different layers of the immune response. So we've got cells that are trained for different things. So we have the immediate protective response. The first protective response is our spit. Our saliva has proteins in it, salivary IgA, that is the first line of defense against respiratory infections. So what we know from some of the old research from the 90s out of Harvard, the question was, you always need a captive audience. So these were medical students facing final exams, seeing that there was always a group of students who got the flu, some kind of viral infection, a cold, during exams or right after. So the scientists wanted to know what was going on. And they measured, you know, as a research scientist, especially in psychology, you're more likely to want to do or get permission to do things that you're not taking blood. That if you could take spit or pee, you're better off. So here what they looked at was they took the saliva from the students and measured what's called the salivary IgA, which is an immunoglobulin, and saw that the students who were really stressed, that IgA was really low. And that now the question was, how do you increase? Can you increase the salivary IgA? They weren't thinking so much about stress. They were just thinking about the protective mechanism. Yeah, if they watched funny movies, they were watching the Marx Brothers. And I think in the original study was watch an hour. And the IgA went up. And if they had them watched violence, war movies, the IgA went down. So, you know, I always look at that as, wow, that's so easy. What are we watching? What are we paying attention to? I mean, I know I'm paying attention to all the COVID news I can find. And so should we watch the news as much as we're watching? That's kind of impairing our ability, our first protective mechanism against viruses. And this new virus is obviously a respiratory virus. So it's interesting because yesterday I was, you know, okay, let's do something funny. Let's find a funny movie to watch. And I realized yesterday, well, I love watching funny movies, but I'm trying to do some work. I'm trying to develop this immune PowerPoint. I can't sit and watch funny movies while I'm working. So what else can I do? And I don't know that there was so much research on music, but I looked at, first of all, what we knew about what lowers IgA, salivary IgA: stress, worry, isolation, loneliness, guilt, and depression. So all of those kinds of psychological states lowers the IgA. What improves IgA? Reducing stress, pleasure, and pleasure. And so I looked at yesterday, it was just yesterday, well, what brings me pleasure? Listening to music. I know I can always move into gets me out of my depressed mode. I can always listen to music and I'm less stressed. Whether I needed the data for it or not, I just knew in this moment, I need something that takes me out of listening to news, feeling alone, or whatever negative thing we can think of, and bring pleasure into the picture, because we know pleasure increases salivary IgA. So it's like just finding the simple strategies that we can use. You know, I can go on and on and on about it, but it gives us, I mean, part of the whole psychoneuroimmunology, which is important, I think, for people to realize, because I was in it from the very beginning when there was very little research. I'm aware of the old research, not so much the new research, because I think it's more important to be a teacher than necessarily a researcher for me. And one of the key things that came out in the early days was seeing who stays well, who gets sick. And some of the work was looking at the notion of hardiness and resilience. And one of the very first studies was working with men executives from the Bell Telephone Company. And they were going through deregulation, and they were going through either losing their job or moving or something very stressful. And so the psychologist in charge, Suzanne Cabasa, looked at, were these guys going to get sick with this very stressful situation? And who wasn't going to get sick? So what she ended up describing is something she called the 3 C's. The 3 C's were having a sense of control, challenge, and commitment. What challenge was instead of seeing something as a stress and a threat, how do I make it a challenge? How do we make what's happening right now a challenge? How can I live my life differently and feel empowered by it? And where you feel you have a sense of control. We can't control what's happening outside, but we can learn ways to manage ourselves right now. We can manage our lives. We don't need to go out and buy tons of toilet paper, but we can have some food for the week, or have connections with friends. If I get sick, would you get me chicken soup or something like that, that you really feel you have a sense of control for yourself. It's an inner job. Health is an inner job, that you have some kind of way of managing what's going on inside. And then commitment was commitment to your church, your family, something greater. I need to write a book. Right now, my son is, he says, okay, this is time for me to write. So, we see that, how do we use this time in a constructive way? So what Cabasa was able to show, and it's held up over the years, that the shifting our perception about the event to challenge. Okay, good. What am I going to do? How am I going to manage it? Seeing that we have ways of managing it gives us a sense of control and gets us out of helplessness, hopelessness. Okay, here's something I can do for myself. I can't change what's happening outside, but I can change what's happening here. So that goes all the way to the cells.
And is that when you, by all that experience, is that when you decided this book is needed? Definitely. I mean, was that the turning point?
It was
Secret of Yourselves, when you started that book. Was that after?
It was definitely, I started, at that time I was on the faculty of CIIS, California Institute of Integral Studies in Integral Health, and started teaching psychoneuroimmunology to the psychology students and the health students. And it got to be much more, it started, when did I start teaching there? In 89. And by 99, it had morphed much more into, well, I'm a cell person, I'm not a psychologist. What's happening at a cellular level? So I started including more of the cell information as I was teaching. I mean, not just immune cells, but more cells. And it goes back to that first time I looked under the microscope. I think at that point I was fairly agnostic, but looking at these living creatures, like, there's got to be a God. I mean, these are not accidents. And so that started coloring my way of looking at life a lot. I might not have been willing to talk about it too much, but started writing the book around the year 2000. Nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted it. I don't know how many publishers I'd sent it to, and just gave up on it. It's like, okay. And it was called Cells in the Sacred. And, you look at divine timing.
Exactly.
Starting to write it at 2000, and I thought I knew what I knew, but I didn't know. And so it wasn't until like 2010, I was doing a workshop on Cells in the Sacred at Noetic Sciences at the retreat center. And the day after the workshop, the acquisitions editor from Sounds True had been following my work, which I didn't know. She said, "Do you have a book?" And I said, "Not really. I have a chapter. I worked on an outline. I have a chapter. Just send it to me." I said, "Okay." And she worked with me over the whole summer to make a book proposal that her, all the powers that would be, it sounds true, would want to go out, to produce. And so I don't know if she's done that with other authors, but it was really an amazing experience and then she got me an amazing editor who didn't know anything about science, but could ask questions and help make it much more poetic than it started. So, I mean, I still love the book. I'm really proud of it.
It should be. It's a great book.
Yeah.
So let me back up for just 1 minute before I forget. And then we can move forward with the book and your course. I want to bring something funny to the table that you just mentioned, and I was hysterical. And since then, I've heard from so many people, this toilet paper love affair people have out there has caused someone to make some women's earrings that are rolls of toilet paper.
It's hilarious.
I think we will, talk about being creative, but we will forever talk about this history in time and toilet paper. It will be a moment in time for sure. So I wanted to bring some humor because I think that's really funny. And I wanted to add one more thing that I think is significant because it's so easy, we can all do it, is, and I believe it started with Jonathan Goldman from, who is the president, is it international or nationally? Sound Healing Group. Has been doing sound for years. He talks about humming, and then you have brought that. And so I know you can say a couple words about humming because we can all do that and how that changes us really quickly.
Very quickly. Well, it's interesting because when I was doing a presentation on the immune system the other day, there's one of the trajectories I went on was to study Qigong fairly seriously. And the Taoists have many ways of protecting ourselves against viruses. One is rubbing our neck, like with a towel, but with our hands. The other is diagonally going from the left one shoulder down to the other right side and shake it out. And the third is something called the thymus pat and hum. And so the Taoists knew about humming a long time ago. So it's warming your, rubbing above your heart and your thymus is right above your heart. Rubbing it, warming it, and then then tapping it, and then humming. And the research that Jonathan was able to publish about was that when we tap, just a few minutes, and students have, told the story too. We tap just a few minutes. You're lowering your stress hormones. You're increasing your endorphins, which lowers pain. And if we're stressed, we feel more pain because we're more tense. It also improves immune and lymphatic function. So patting, you've heard the story. Some students will do it for a half hour. Like, well, maybe I'm lucky if I do it for 5 minutes. But again, this gives us something encouraging that we have the science that shows that this is changing our physiology, and which again gives us more of a sense of control.
Thank you. So we're going to have to wrap up pretty soon here. Let's give an overview of the course that's coming out and how people can joined the course, as well as you are also working on another immune system, or it's ready, right, to roll on an immune system course. And I want people to know, I want to throw this out real quick because I would like to do this again. I would like us to continue on, because with all of your brilliance, knowledge, experience, I believe we could have more of these little chats and possibly have people write in questions and things they might have, so we can have an ongoing experience. We know that this is going to last for a couple more weeks anyway, and so we might as well take advantage and have the opportunity to work with you. So I'd like to put that out. So if you can talk a little bit about the course coming up, we're going to do it online, and the immune system, and then whatever else you want to add. So people know we're here to help.
Yeah, so Secrets of Your Cells, the book. I mean, this was Ronnie's brilliant idea. Oh, there it is. Ronnie's brilliant idea to do a book club, which was not something I looked very favorably upon when she suggested the idea. I think I'm always resistant to everybody's ideas. But we did the first one in August. We just finished the second one last week or 2 weeks ago. And basically what we do is we go through the book, a new chapter every week, and there's exercises in the book. And I bring to the class, what do I know since, I mean, the book was published in 2013. So there's been a lot of changes since 2013 in science or in my own knowledge. So what's new to bring to the table? And also, I do a guided visualization at the end relating to the chapter, the content, and encourage people to use their creative ideas and how they may want to express themselves, which I will give you. This was way back when I first started teaching about cells. I needed a physical example. So this is a salad bowl. And to find, it's like, well, how can I create a cell? And in this last class, there were a number of people who were really creatives, art students. And they shared a lot of paintings of their cells. And, the parts of the cell you can learn about. And what I decided to do in this class, different than before, is to add a little bit of immune knowledge. I mean, the chapter 2 in the book talks about the immune system. It's the I am chapter, the identity. But I decided, what kind of little tips can I include throughout the 8 weeks that people can bring into their life that will make a difference? Because that's really what we all want to do. How do we make a difference? People sign up before the 31st. There's an early bird special. There's online, there's a video that you could see that's an introduction to the class. It's pretty straightforward, and it's gotten to be a lot more fun and easy. People get in, so there's interaction. We do it on Zoom, so it's really timely. You don't have to move out of your house. And if you can't make it live, it's recorded so that people can watch the recording, or some of the students have said, I want to watch it again. So that's always available to them. And what I did for some of the guided visualizations, they're always at the end of the hour and a half or the hour long course. What I've done in a couple of instances, I'm still got it on my list, is take just the audio for the guided visualization so people can just listen to that and they don't have to go through the whole series if they want the guided visualization. And I must admit, I was really surprised that people could really get into it through Zoom. And so it was fun to do. And I thank you, Ronnie, for having that idea. It was brilliant. And
wait 1 second though. Thank you. Thanks. You forgot to tell him it's not just a book club. It's a book club with the author.
That's right.
That's the difference. And so, yes, you're here now talking, but people get to see you every week, and we have other book clubs coming where you actually will always be able to interact with the author live. That's the difference. And so I wanted to share you as much as your book.
Yes, because you're getting the knowledge behind the book.
Yeah.
You're getting all that, plus the personality that wrote the book and all about you, why you wrote this book, how it came to fruition. I think that's really the beauty of this.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm also putting together, I haven't decided if I'm going to do a whole immune course. It's because Elson wants me to do something with him, but I've been invited to do an immune online class next week. So I will have that video. I'm going to offer it free. Oh. It'll be an hour immune video that goes, a little more detail than we did today. So, we all have to do our part right now. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I totally agree with you. Thank you.
Since you ask everyone to do their part, I'm going to expand on that. I am going to ask the people that see this if they will also share this. This is going to be free. We're going to post it in several places besides Facebook and up on our websites, and pass it around so that they can also gain the knowledge. We'll have a lot of humming people out there, and we'll have a lot of happy cells. And if you have questions, please interact with us, and then we can answer those. That's what we're all here for. And so there'll be many more people joining like this. And so we thank you for your time. And Patty, do you have something you want to say in conclusion? And Sondra?
I'd like, are you going to do another book like this one, you think? What's the dream?
Well, there's the immune book that was kind of a work for hire in a way, the Ultimate Immunity. The next book, if I know I need to do one, would definitely be on the elements.
I think that would be awesome. Yeah.
Definitely has to be on the mystical, metaphysical, for sure.
If you go to Sondra's website, sondrabarrett.com, she has all, or not all, shouldn't say that. She has all the varieties of cells that you can look at, cells, cell salts, elements, astro elements, all the pieces you can see, so you can start understanding both the inside and outside of our world from a different place.
And if you so choose, you can sip some wine.
That's a perfect idea.
In moderation.
Exactly. Yeah. I meant to bring that one up especially. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. This was fun to do. Thank you.
It was awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for including me, Ronnie. I appreciate it.
Oh, we love having you. You're part of this. You know that. So I will, as well as Sondra and Patty, will post the next one when we do this, and keep you informed and keep this party rolling.
Okay, great.
Have a fabulous day, you too.
Okay, you too.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Love you.
Okay.
You too.